Explore the history, relationships, expertise, and data that go into ensuring Stine growers get maximum yield potential. This is the Stine Seedcast. Here's your host, David Thompson.
Hello, and welcome to the Stine Seedcast. I'm David Thompson, National Marketing and Sales Director for Stine Seed Company. Today, our guest on the Seedcast is Jason Green, Southern Division Director of Sales for Stine. Thanks for joining us, Jason.
Thanks for having me.
So today's conversation is part of our ongoing series on the Seedcast, Agriculture Around the U.S. The goal of this is to bring listeners agronomic information from all of Stine's territories. So be on the lookout for more episodes on this series in the future. Now, as the Southern Division Director of Sales, Jason's priority is to support his team of salespeople and agronomists in the Southern Corn Belt all the way to the Delta South. Today, he's going to discuss the different crop management techniques of his region, specific challenges that farmers face in the South, and how he and his team work with growers when selecting corn and soybean seed. Jason's going to be joining us remotely from his home office in Lawrenceville, Illinois. So let's get started. Well, Jason, so to get us started today, I thought it'd be great if you just give us a little bit of background about yourself. Tell us about your background, your history, and how you came to be with Stine.
Sure, yeah. So my background started, I'm a farm kid. Actually would be considered a fourth generation farmer. We still have a 900-acre farm that my dad still currently runs. And actually my 18-year-old son is helping along the way as well. Probably one of these days he'll have the opportunity to farm that and be the fifth generation, which is pretty neat because we actually got landowners that we've been on there for 5 generations as well. So it's pretty awesome. You don't see that a lot in agriculture anymore. So it's pretty cool. So raised through there. And of course, after college, had my agribusiness degree and started out in the co-op level, working for Wabash Valley FS here locally, and actually became an ag teacher and a head basketball coach. So kind of a mixed bag. Never thought I'd do that, but did that for 7 years. And then after that, went work for another seed company, and then ended up get a phone call from a guy by the name of Ken Wolf, and worked with him and got hired on as a regional sales agronomist at the time, and ran Region 18, which consisted at the time of Kentucky, Southern Illinois, and actually Southwestern Indiana. So it's pretty neat. We had really good success and met a lot of great growers, and I think brought a lot of great growers into the Stine Seed Company. And we decided to expand, and here I am as the director of the South.
And so roundabout what year would that be then that you came to Stine?
Yeah, so it's been 9 years ago, actually last month. So pretty neat to say that I've been here since 2015.
Awesome. Well, congratulations. So we're here talking about agriculture around the U.S., and particularly your area of expertise is agriculture in the southern part of the United States, because that's the swath that you cover for Stine. So before we get into that, tell us about your role as the division director for the Southern Division.
Absolutely. So, yeah, currently I added it up this morning, and we got about 14 states that I currently cover. So really it goes from Southern Illinois to, I always say, kind of follow down to Georgia, Florida, then all the way over to Texas, Oklahoma. And we do work a little bit in California currently as well. So you take all those states in between. My role is to cover the regions that we currently have there. So we have 6 regional managers all throughout. And then also I help cover the Southeast with independent sales reps there, and also cover the Texas, Oklahoma area with independent sales reps as well.
Yeah, Jason, when I was thinking about the area that you cover, back in history, the British used to say that the sun never sets on the British Empire. And you probably can't quite say that about the Southern Division for Stine, but you cover pretty much from coast to coast now with their presence in California. So that's pretty exciting. So getting into some of the areas that you cover, again, I think you have some pretty unique areas as it relates to corn and soybean production. So maybe we want to start, I guess, geographically, maybe to the east. Let's talk about some of the areas like Florida, which is a newer area for us. That's an area where corn acres are expanding.
Yeah, so really when you look at, say, Florida, and I would actually put Georgia in there, The first thing you need to understand is really for corn and soybeans, they consider a lot of it for actually cover crop type instances that they can make income off of, because a lot of times vegetables, sweet corn, onions, potatoes, you got all sorts of vegetables that they grow in Florida and Georgia, along with like watermelons and fruits, that they need something to come in and cover crop with, and to make sure the ground's covered. And so that's the first thing, is getting them to see that there's maybe more income there for them to get if we focus in on the corn and soybeans. That's been kind of neat the last few years running through there. The other thing that's really neat is that they all farm a little differently. I was actually in Florida this week, and we went from anywhere from where they farm basically on furrows or on mounds, because or beds, because that's what they do with vegetables. And so they'll bed it up. That way, when they irrigate it, the water, they'll irrigate it with ditch irrigation, and they only have like 16 rows in between each ditches. So, but that water then will flow through that soil and actually come up. And so it's a lot different. Whereas in the middle of the state, they do, just like we have here, pivot irrigation, and they're farming it without furrows, just like we do in the Midwest. You'll go anywhere from 42-inch rows to 30-inch rows, maybe 20-inch rows. Just depends on what they have, and also if their focus is vegetables, it's going to be wider rows, right? Because the amount of equipment that they have for everything else has to then coincide with what they're doing in the corn and soybeans. They raise great crops. They get better every year with it, but it's pretty unique to what we do here in the Midwest. But that southeast corner, it kind of looks like that. Then you move into the Delta area, right? So you're talking your Louisiana and your Arkansas areas, and how they kind of irrigates a little different. A lot of it's like polypipes, what they call it. But it's basically a plastic ring around the whole field with a berm, and it kind of just floods that field a little bit to irrigate it down the furrows. So kind of different soil types, but that's kind of how they irrigate it. Whereas you go to Texas, it's all pivot irrigation that you see there, just like you see here. But just depending on where you are and what kind of vegetables they raise and what other crops is going to determine how they farm.
So in the Florida, Georgia market, like you said, probably corn is ultimately competing for a lot of acres with vegetable crops, or as you said, is considered almost a secondary crop to the vegetable crop. I know for a time there was also replacement of orange groves. Is that something that's still taking place maybe in the northern part of Florida?
Yeah, you'll see that. Of course, they have some disease issues with the Florida trees. I think they call it greening, or what they call it, but that was killing the trees. So a lot of those groves were kind of dying out. Plus, there's a lot of competition from other countries. I know with like Mexico, with the Florida or with the citrus side of things. So they were trying to find replacements. So corn comes into play with those areas as well. Guys will clean those out. You got in Georgia, you also got a lot of pine trees. A lot of your lumber is going to come from Georgia with all the pine tree farms that they have. And so they'll also go in there and wipe out the old pine trees that they can't harvest, and they may farm those as well. So it just kind of opens it up. The biggest thing too is it's real sandy. So that may be, something people aren't used to. And when I say sand, it's DECs of less than 3 and doesn't hold any water. But what's really cool is they can spoon feed everything. And so like down in Florida, they were basically fertilizing with the irrigation 14 times in that corn crop with fertilizer. So they're basically spoon feeding that stuff as it moves along, which really helps with yield. They get a lot of boost from that side of things. If you look at a lot of your corn growers that have won in the past with some high yielding corn, they've actually come from that South Georgia, North Florida area, because they can spoon feed their nutrients into there.
Yeah, like down in Valdosta, I think was one of the really biggest ones in recent years. So
yeah, Randy Nally.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Switching gears a little bit, you mentioned the Delta area, so you move into kind of the Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi area. Now that's an area where Stine probably has had a little longer presence. We've been there for a while now, as opposed to maybe Florida and Georgia and Texas. So describe a little bit of the market down there and how that works.
Yeah, down there, you're still going to see different size rows. You got guys still in the 36-inch rows. You also got guys in the 30s. The irrigation, to me, is probably the biggest thing that's different to me on how they use a polypipe instead of, you've got flood ditch irrigation in Florida, and then you've got pivot irrigation in Georgia because they're getting water out of the ponds. Here, they're actually using that polypipe. So, you got pipe, this plastic that goes around, it's got holes in it. and shoots the water out and lets it run down the furrows. And they'll still plant on like a furrow type system, but it won't be as high as say your bedded systems for vegetables. It'll just be so it raises that up a little bit and the water can run down each row.
And in some of those areas, the competition crop wise would be like rice. Is that one of the markets?
Yep, that is correct. So really, you're fighting the rice market with soybeans and corn. That's the three that you're going to run with most of the time. You get down to Louisiana, there's sugarcane country, which is mostly all sugarcane, but that's more on the coast down there in Louisiana.
What's something about that area of the country that is particularly unique from a production standpoint?
Well, one, you're dealing more with that delta area, so I think heavier soils compared to where the other parts of the deep south are. I would say the more richer soils that you have as well. So we can raise maybe easier when it comes to higher yields to push that way. I would say just how people farm. If you go to Mississippi, I think they haven't changed a whole lot compared to what they've done before. I see whereas maybe Arkansas, you see people maybe pushing that envelope a little bit more, and it's just different areas of the country, no different than like I said, Georgia. They're just really trying to figure out how to push that yield higher and higher in that area. So just kind of unique in that side of things. I think the other thing is the dicamba and list battle is pretty heavy because of cotton, right? And that's the other thing we forgot to mention on the crops. In all the deep south, basically from Georgia to Texas, cotton's a big player. And it will always be a big player. And so with that, the dicamba and the enlist side of things is murky sometimes, and it seems like in that Delta area, it's pretty hot and heavy contested for that market.
Right. And what you're driving at there is the fact that Extend cotton or Extend flex, dicamba-enabled cotton is still a pretty prevalent crop in that area. And so
Yes.
when it comes to making the weed control decisions, there is a lot of use of those products in that market. So that
Absolutely. Yep.
So switching gears now, talking a little bit, moving to the next group to the west, you've got kind of Texas, Oklahoma, that part of the world. Again, probably a newer-ish area for Stine. Describe to me a little bit about, what it's like working in that area.
Yeah, I think heat and water, right, is probably the two big things that's easiest to describe. I mean,
And you have plenty of one and not enough of the other.
typically, yeah. Now this year, you get into the Dallas area, and Houston area. They've had all the rain they can handle, which is great. Actually, too much. A lot of flooding in places. But the last 3 years, I mean, if you get to that West Texas and South Texas around the Rio Grande, they're struggling to have water. I mean, rain is key for them. We don't get a lot of the snow melt coming down and filling up reservoirs like they used to. So it's hard to irrigate because those guys are limited on irrigation. In a lot of places, some can pump maybe, up in the panhandle. I was talking to one of our ISRs today, they can pump 200 or 2,000 gallons of water, whatever it is, a minute. But down in the west part and the south, they're limited. They have basically, you get this set amount of water. Some of them, I think it's like a 3-year deal that they have that set amount of water, so they could use it all 1 year and not use it for two, or spread it out. But it's very limited, and so without rains coming in, it's very hard for them to basically get through a season with a good crop. And this last 3 years has been a real challenge, I guess you'd say, for them. But when it comes to corn, actually most of it's on 30-inch rows. You got some wide rows down in some places, but you get in that middle part of the state and of the panhandle, they're all pushing on that 30-inch rows. They're trying to go for really high yields up in the panhandle side of things, where they do have the water and of course all the cattle up there that they feed out. And then they're probably planting them a little bit wider down in the Rio Grande, just because they're trying to capture as much as they can with as less plants as they can, which is kind of, I always tell them, I said, well, you really need to shade the row, when we talk about narrow rows and getting that up so we can conserve water. It's just a topic that I think we can have down there, which, we're kind of leaders in that side of things. At least I feel we are, with our years experience. If we can get those guys to maybe shade that row, we can help them conserve water and become more efficient, which I think would be key down there. Because, you go down there, right, like 3 weeks ago when they were harvesting corn, believe it or not. And what you'd see a lot of ground that's actually fallow. There's not enough water, so there's no need to plant it. No, they can't even get Milo to grow down there. So they'll leave that ground fallowed out. They'll go in there and they'll work it 4 or 5 times a year to make sure it stays clean, and hope for a chance to plant it the next year. So that's probably the biggest difference. It's just heat and water. it's a struggle.
In terms of soil composition, how does it compare as we've been heading west through Florida and the Delta and then into kind of the Texas, Oklahoma area?
Well, I mean, one thing about Texas is I think we can all agree it's size,
Yeah.
right? So I don't know how many states you can fit in there. I saw someone put one in, but we can fit a lot of the littler states in there. But if you're in the Rio Grande area, it's going to be sandy. As you move up into that middle section, you're going to start getting some clay into it, and the Panhandle. It really is. It will be kind of a sandier, but it's got some organic matter to it. So it's just as you move more north, you're going to change soil types, but you're also going to change your climate because your elevation actually increases. When you get in that Panhandle area, I believe they're about 3,000 feet above sea level, so they're actually pretty cool throughout the year. They really don't start planting corn until May, and we were planting corn in the Rio Grande Valley in January. So you kind of see how that stair steps, and we're trying to beat the heat in those southern parts. That's one thing that we're really trying to do is how can we get things in early enough and out early enough that we beat the extreme heat to where in the south they can have good yields. And in Panhandle you don't have that worry. It's actually pretty similar to what we do around here.
So you mentioned something there. I guess it reminded me talking about one of the things we talk all about is higher density planting, which again, in some areas it may be considered counterintuitive, although you talked about the need to shade the row, which can be achieved a couple ways, increase populations and narrow the rows. But the other thing is we've talked a lot on the Seedcast about that high density planting or finding genetics that are suitable for that is sort of the very definition of finding stress hybrids, right? Hybrids that can handle stress.
Yep.
And some of the things you're talking about here, whether it's heat or water, tend to be right in the wheelhouse of stress. So does that work into your favor when trying to look at products for some of these areas?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one, we do test in narrow rows. We also try to test at high population. One is because we don't want lodging, right?
Yep.
That's part of our testing side of things. But I believe it also creates, you said, something that handles that stress and that what can we throw at it? It's going to increase temperature at the top of the plant, at least not in the bottom, but at the top. What we're seeing, and actually what we discussed last week with Florida, was that they're wanting to look at 15-inch row from an aspect of we want to shade the row quicker. By shading that row quicker, it's going to keep it cooler underneath that canopy, which should conserve some water. Is it enough water to save you if you're in a major drought? I don't think anything can save you, right?
Right.
But that's where I think, we can still go to the high density side of things. Now, high density to everybody's a little different. If you're planting 20,000, you shouldn't go to 40. But if you're planting 20, maybe you should go to 25. And we can do that with narrow rows to help shade that row. And so, I think there's a lot of ideas that we do here at Stine that actually will work really well in the South. The biggest probably obstacle, I think, for most people, and I'm a 15-inch row guy. Our farm actually does that here in Southern Illinois, and it works great on marginal ground that we have. But at the end of the day, we don't have to increase a lot of population that allows that plant to go out and mine for the nutrients and then mine for the water, but also shade it to keep it cooler. And probably the biggest obstacle for most people is just the equipment. They're going to have to, maybe buy a planter or switch their planter around, but also find a corn head to help with that situation.
I guess as we keep working around the states here, you have a presence in the southern part of Missouri and into Kansas, which is getting more into the heart of what we call the regular corn belt, maybe, and that's an area where I know Stine's had a presence for a number of years. What are the hallmarks of that part of the country that you work in?
Well, it seems like there's two different spots, even though they're right next to each other. It's not that big of a distance. Kansas always seems a bit drier. I know in the last couple of years they actually have been in a drought. This year it's not really been that case. They've actually had almost at times too much rain in Missouri, but we've had a huge presence there. Our hybrids have worked great in those areas, and I think that's why. I think they handle some of that heat stress and that brings in that because those areas still get hot. Everywhere I go in the South, you got high humidity and you got high heat. And so a lot of the later maturity products we're bringing in have done really well in that area. One nice thing about Missouri is they've been a really big adopter of the E3 technology on soybeans as well. And so that's really helped us as we're the leader in that. And so we've been able to push that envelope. But, you still got irrigation systems running in Kansas. And boy, if they've got a good year, they can raise really good crops out there. I mean, like you said, it's really you're really stepping into the Midwest at that point at times, even though it's you're the northern part of the South.
Yep. The northern part of the South. So, one thing I remember about Kansas too is I know at various times I feel like there are pockets where the maturity spread on corn can be pretty significant. And I don't remember why that is. Do you have any information? I mean, there'll be guys planting really early corn relative to what you'd expect, I guess. Is that still a thing that happens?
Well, it is, and I think actually as we move further south, I kind of hit on it. We're trying to beat the heat, and so what we're trying to do is we're trying to plant an earlier day corn. So like we've actually got luck with a 90-day product, even down in the Rio and down in Florida, that seems to travel very well to the south. But it allows these guys to get the corn moving, gets pollinated early, so hopefully it's still cool by then. And it seems like even in, like I said, that Missouri, Kansas, that's something that we've been trying to do is one, you're trying to get it out early so you beat the heat. Two, you're trying to capture a market. A lot of times, if I can capture a June, July market and have some to take there to the grain facility, I might get a bump or a bonus on that compared to if we get into the hot and heavy Midwest harvest where those guys are rolling end of August, 1st of September, and really starting to fill up the elevators.
Well, and then I wonder, I guess now that you're mentioning that, I wonder if some of the other sort of unique attributes that sometimes come with our corn, like as it relates to silking and pollination, I wonder if that helps these areas you're talking about. Not only are you trying to beat the heat, but you're also trying to make sure you make the nick, so to speak. Is that fair?
Absolutely. 9808, right? And for anybody that doesn't know what that is, but it's a 116-day product that we've had around for a long time. And the one benefit that hybrids always had is it seems to have a 3 week or 4 week period of pollination. It's one of the longest pollinations I've ever seen on a hybrid. And that allows you to have more days or more possibilities of, like you said, not missing the nick, getting pollinated, and making sure you have a full ear of corn. And that just amounts to yield at the end of the day. And so our products certainly have that longer pollination period. Maybe they flower a little bit early too, so they can beat that heat that we get. Because the worst part about July for anywhere in the South is heat. And if you're pollinating in July, you always risk that chance of really missing pollination. The reason why 2012 was such a struggle wasn't necessarily we didn't get rain. I mean, we were in a big drought. In fact, our farm averaged about 3 bushel that year. But simple fact was we missed pollination because of the heat.
So wider pollination window helps. It doesn't prevent it necessarily, but it certainly can help.
I think I remember like right before 2012, I don't know who it was, told me one time, well, these products, these hybrids are so good now that a drought will never hurt us. Well, Mother Nature always has a way.
Famous last words.
That's right.
So moving across the map, do you have anybody in Arizona or in New Mexico yet?
I know that we are talking to someone right now. We're kind of just we've got a presence in New Mexico, just right on the other side of Texas. A lot of dairies right there, kind of close to that Lubbock Panhandle area. There's actually a couple 100,000 acres of corn in both states. We have tried to work through that area, but we're currently working our way there in California right now, up in that Sacramento area.
Well, so let's talk about that then, because that is really quite new for us. I think you worked on that over here in the last 12 months of just getting a door open out there in the California area. So tell us a little bit about corn production in that part of the state of California.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in California, silage is the key. It's going to be mostly all silage corn. It doesn't leave the state because of all the dairies that they have up in that area. What's really cool about that area, though, is you're actually below sea level in a lot of those places. So what they've done is they have built waterways up to capture the water, and then encircled in that is maybe 15,000 acres of farm ground that sits below it, and they farm it. So it's how they dried it out to make that happen. They're going to plant 30-inch rows, though. It's going to look very similar to what we do, and they raise fantastic corn there. But none of it leaves the state. In fact, they're actually the biggest, I believe, importer of corn in the U.S. as well from other states, bringing it in to make sure that they can feed all the cattle industry that's there. But it's just a really cool situation because they call them islands. So if you ever go there, you can go over one bridge. You're on the next island. There'll be 20,000 acres of farm ground, and you're going to compete a little bit. There's vegetables, of course. Of course, you got all the nuts, pistachios, and things like that they raise there as well. So you're competing with multiple crops, but you really got to have. I believe it's about an acre for every dairy cow that you have. And so they have most of those dairies are needing 5 to 10,000 acres apiece just for silage corn. So there's always going to be corn raised there. the grain market's up real high and you can outdo some of the vegetable market, then you'll raise a little bit more corn. But currently, they're raising at least 700,000 acres of corn just right there in that area. It's pretty unique. The maturities are the same as they are in the Midwest. They're using 110 to 120 day hybrids right in that area. And they will actually, the other unique thing is they will plant from basically March through September. So they've got a very wide planting window, and they'll do a couple crops if they can.
Okay, so double cropping essentially.
Yep, that's right. Yeah,
And that's one thing we didn't talk about on across all of these spectrums. Also, one of the things that's interesting is the idea of the quote unquote growing season is different in some of these markets. And so, as you mentioned with California, Florida is certainly kind of different. I guess, would you talk a little bit about what those different windows are in some of these markets?
Florida, we're gonna plant in February. Most places you may plant early January, but they usually get a frost right there at February 1st. So they will try to wait. There's just for some reason, except for really in the far, say, Homestead, Belglade area, which is that Lake Okeechobee area. Most of those places are going to plant 1st of February. Now they'll stop planting corn right 1st of May because they're going to make sure that they can plant their other crops. Cabbage is a big crop in the corn area, so everything has to be predicated based off of what they're going to plant next. Just like you said, multiple crops. We want to make sure, and that cabbage is probably what makes them the most money. So they're going to do that, or potatoes, or something like that. You get into Georgia, you're still looking at probably March is when we're going to start. Maybe that very southern part of Georgia, March 1st, and work our way through the season. They're still actually planting. I talked to a gentleman down around the Vidalia onion area. And he's actually going to plant some soybeans here in 2 weeks. So they're still planting crops. They'll still plant crops through August because they will have a window. It's a little later because it stays warmer and kind of, tricks the soybeans and staying around a little bit longer. Any part in the South in that Delta, say that Alabama, Mississippi, the further south you get, you're still looking at March planting. They're going to plant early compared to here. But as you move north, they may be just April 1st is when they're gonna start hitting it. So as you move north, you move more into our kind of timeline that we're used to in the Midwest, but they can plant earlier. The Rio Grande, like I said, you're talking January most of the time that they start, and then like I said, they're still just starting to get planted in that Panhandle area as well. So multiple different times that they plant, but then we also have double crops, which we brought up. It's also is wheat, right? So I cover Kentucky, Tennessee as well, and then that Missouri and Kansas area. Wheat's a big crop. In fact, I know in Kentucky, 50% of all the soybean acres are actually double crop acres. And so they'll get in there and harvest the wheat, which they've been doing here, I think, for the last week or two, and they'll plant the beans right behind it. I actually know a guy, and believe it or not, even in southern Indiana, that actually plants corn after his wheat for double crops if he can get in there here this time frame. So I always think people are always trying to find more ways to bring more income in. So if you can double crop and make a little bit more than you would on a single crop, it seems like that's what they take hold to and they try to do. But that wheat area, these guys can make 70 to 100 bushel wheat, come back with 40 to 60 bushel beans. They're making pretty good money on that. And so far, the last few years, we've had a pretty good bumper wheat crop and really good beans after it.
Again, and I don't want to paint too broad a brush because your geography is so big and there are all these different facets to the area that you serve. But as you look across there, wondering about what some of the real drivers are, when you talk to growers maybe in the upper part of the Corn Belt, the I-states and so forth, and they're asking you about, well, what are the things that are driving the decisions across that area that you serve? We talked about, of course, heat and water. Those are always important, but are there other things, whether it's diseases, weed pressure, crop practice? What are some of the other things that are key decisions in each of these areas that you work?
Well, I would say with anybody that farms, I would say income is always going to be the first thing that they look at. And so when you talk about multiple crops and can I plant soybeans, peanuts, cotton, or corn? Okay, so those are probably your four main deep south products. It's going to be what can they make, how many bushels they can make from that, and then what's the income level. And some of it is predicated they have to do it because they have so much contracted with, say, the buying point, which is new, I think, to a lot of people that don't live there, but you have buying points for your peanuts and you have buying point for cotton. If you're contracted with them, that will tell you some of the acres that you have there. But a lot of it too is I think sometimes it's the easy button. And it's, I'm not saying that raising corn and soybeans is easy, but when you look at guys in the South, the one thing I think that's really unique is the amount of equipment that they have to raise cotton, to raise peanuts. It may take 8 or 9 people out in the field just to harvest one peanut field, and that's so they can run the harvester, they can run the flipper, the harvester, and then also the cart that then takes it to the semi that takes it off. And if you bring a guy, I had a gentleman from Georgia come up and visit my place probably 4 years ago, and he's like, "Well, where's all your equipment?" And I go, "Well, it's in that shed over there." And he's like, "Well, what do you got?" And I'm like, "Sprayer, planter, tractor, combine. That's about it." And he's like, "That's pretty crazy to him," because he's like, "Man, I got this." He basically has an equipment dealership right there in his own place. So I think they want to raise more corn and soybeans, and I think that's been the big driver, is because some of those crops are extremely time intensive and labor intensive, and that all costs money. And I think they can raise a good corn crop and a good soybean crop and have a good price. That's been the real driver for, I would say, the growth in those areas. I don't think 25 years ago they raised I know they didn't raise as many soybeans down in the South, but they certainly didn't raise as much corn either. But the driver's been that there's a market for it, and that they can don't have to use as much labor and equipment to get that job done, and they can still raise a great crop. Those are probably the two biggest drivers. Now, you talk about diseases and insects. Well, the insects never die, they just get bigger. The grasshoppers, which I'm not a fan of, I don't like the way they feel when they grab a hold of you. They're kind of creepy, but those things are monsters to me down there, and stuff. So they could probably carry you away if you're not careful. And so you have to have certain traits. You want insect traits in your products to help combat that. You want to scout as much as possible because they got those types of things. And all the diseases seem to start from the south and work their way up to the north, through hurricanes and winds. So they're getting it way before we do up here, and so we have to really watch for those types of things and either beat it or beat it with a spray or something over the top.
So, as we talked about here today, several of the areas that you're working with, Stine is probably less well known than it is maybe in the heart of the main part of the Corn Belt. So, I guess what are the things that resonate with growers as you're out talking about Stine as a company or Stine as a brand and the products that we have?
I think the further south you get, the more prideful they are. Correct, and really, I think just great American people, and they love the fact that we're an American-owned company that's family-owned. I mean, that's the first thing. Just our story. They really take hold of that. They see that as something that's very welcome. They love the fact that we're coming in. I think we do things a lot differently than other companies down there. We don't take them for granted. We're going to visit them. We're going to be there to help them out because we're trying to help them gain yield. I think that's something that maybe they haven't had as much as some expertise and in some areas, and to go down there and try to promote. Here, maybe we should try this. Something a little different because we're a different company. We're here to make sure you get the highest yield you can have, and so let's work together. So it's really a partnership, and I think they just look at that family owned company aspect that we have going on, and really resonates with them on that side of things. I think they like the testing program. When you talk about testing for stress, that's the first thing that goes into their mind. And we can preach about our elite trials and how we do that and how we bring products to the forefront for them to see. Lastly is just our place in the soybean industry has been big, knowing that we are creating a lot of genetics out here, and that just how we test those genetics and how we have so many trials, and we can bring what you need. We got all sorts of things to pick from. If you need a soybean that handles cyst, we can find that through our products to make sure that you have that. Maybe you need some that handles root knot nematodes, which is big down in the south. We'll pick products out of our catalog that fits that. So we have that opportunity with all the varieties that we have to help those guys out.
Well, so as we're wrapping up today, I guess, Jason, I was going to ask you, looking ahead, with what we've got coming and what we're working on and things you're seeing, are there particular things that you're excited about that are coming from Stine that you think are really going to be helpful for growers in the area that you serve?
First thing is corn. I think since we started, really, we expanded, I would say, the way we're handling the South 2 or 3 years ago. And within that time, I think we have increased our footprint, and also what we've done is we've helped our testing to bring corn that will work for the South. The key for our corn is it's got to handle the heat stress. It's got to handle less water, so it's got to be more efficient. And I think we've shown that we can do that with the products that we are bringing. And I'm just excited about the stuff that we're bringing out. Some of the stuff that we got coming this year in 2025 and beyond. We're seeing what they can do, and they're phenomenal products, and they really handle that stress that we're having in the South. I think on the soybean side, I mean, how can you not be excited about it? I mean, we are a soybean company, right? So we have things that really work. And, as we move into that, we've been testing more with regional plots, local plots with customers that have helped us then with placement, because all you got to do is find the right product. I think we do that better than anybody else in the South in the last couple of years.
Well, Jason, it's been a great conversation. Glad you could join us today, and thankful for the work that you and your team do to represent the Stine brand to growers literally all across the southern part of the United States. Yeah. So glad we're able to catch you back in your home base here for a brief period of time. And thanks for joining us on the Seedcast today.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it. And if I'm not at home, I'm usually some other state. So it's a fun job, though. I get to see a lot of different areas. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, that's our time for today. I'd like to thank our guests and our listeners for joining us on another episode of the Stine Seedcast. We'll be back again soon with more expert interviews and insights about all things Stine. If you have a question for our Stine experts, send it to us at asktheseedcast@stineseed.com. That's asktheseedcast@stineseed.com. And to never miss an episode, subscribe to the Stine Seedcast wherever podcasts are found.
Subscribe to the Stine Seedcast wherever podcasts are found. To learn more about Stine and its elite corn and soybean genetics, visit stineseed.com. Stine has yield.